So, when people are looking for further information, Nick, where would you suggest that they start?
Yes, there's a wide array of information sources. One of the go-to websites is EPI's Myrtle Rust website, and that has collated and coordinated links to almost every part of the management program, which is including the guidelines from industry. It includes links to the Department of Conservation, the research programs such as Ngā Takitaki, which is the Biological Heritage Science Challenge, the Manaki Whenua-Lanke Research Program Beyond Myrtle Rust. So all of those are linked in this one part of the website. So that's, I think, your first one-stop shop.
So in terms of the current status of the disease in the country, Nick, where does it sit within relation to the Biosecurity Act?
Well, legally it's still declared as an unwanted organism by MPI, and so it is has controlled regulations around it, but what we do for management is changing. So it's always important to remember that hygiene measures for these unwanted organisms are still required.
So does that mean that it's restricted for people to move the material around that's infected with Myrtle Rust?
Absolutely. It's still illegal to knowingly transport it. So, for example, if you see potted plants or pieces of a tree that are infected, to knowingly move that and not dispose of it in an appropriate way is still a regulated organism under the Act. So you cannot do that.
So in terms of dealing with it in the proper way, is there a particular process that people need to follow? Can they take it to the landfill?
Yes, so there's a number of approaches that you can use when you're trying to dispose of known infected Myrtle Rust materials, and we're going to go through that today with the standard operating procedures.
So for people who would like to record occurrences of the disease, Nick, is there a particular process that they need to follow?
Yeah, this is really important because there isn't an active systematic surveillance system underway now for Myrtle Rust, so it really does rely on the community and the industry and people like yourselves to be the eyes and ears out and undertake surveillance for Myrtle Rust in New Zealand now. And so that's really critical because no one else is doing it. So if you do, please use the iNaturalist. You can download that from the App Store. But we've also got links to how you use the iNaturalist to report Myrtle Rust, and that's part of the kit today and also available on the websites that we're giving you.
So in terms of the various different types of species in New Zealand, obviously our natives are very important to us as a taonga species. What are the likely longer term issues that we may be faced with, Nick, with Myrtle Rust?
Well, this is a really interesting point and why we need the research and the surveillance underway, because we still don't know how many hosts there are in New Zealand in terms of and what hosts they are, how damaged or what their long-term impact will be. For example, we're already seeing quite devastating impacts on our ramarama, and but there will or possibly be other hosts that are going to have similar impact as that inoculum spreads through the country and also the inoculum levels increase. And we did see that in Australia, where after many years of the fungus producing spores and many years of building up more and more inoculum in the air, they found more species were affected and sometimes quite severely. So we still don't know the true impact. And for example, there are some really vulnerable species that we need to be thinking about in terms of seed preservation or their long-term survival, and swamp mighty or Syzygium mighty is one, but there's a whole lot of others. There's the rata vines, the aka, so there's a whole lot.
So when you talk about inoculum levels, Nick, what do you mean by that?
Well, it's as the rust has continued to establish and spread and infect more and more susceptible hosts, that means that the fungus is reproducing itself and producing many more thousands of millions of wind-borne spores. So that increases the inoculum levels or the spore load in the air that is now moved around through wind currents and rain and other factors. And that will mean that we may see more and more hosts that we didn't realise were going to be infected, or we didn't realise how badly they would be infected until many, many years of this inoculum building in the country.
So do you think that we can learn by some of the experiences that our colleagues in Australia have now recorded?
Yes, absolutely, because there were some formerly quite common hosts that initially appeared to be either resilient or not very affected, that many years later, with the spore loading and continual epidemics and outbreaks happening in the ecosystem, that actually some of these plants were quite threatened, and they started to disappear from the forest floors, and the fact that that was taking out the seedlings, or it was hitting the fruiting or the flowering. So just because it doesn't appear to be a serious leaf disease on an adult tree, it doesn't mean that the younger plants or the seedlings are not going to be affected. So we need to be continuing to do long-term monitoring and surveillance, and that's where you can help is reporting when you see myrtle rust on where it is on the iNaturalist.
So when we talk about the various different species in New Zealand, are there any particular tree types that we need to be concerned about, Nick, in terms of myrtle rust and its impacts?
Well, we've already had Rob and others talk about the devastating impact on ramarama, which is continuing to increase on those populations. But also we're starting to be quite concerned about our native syzygium or swamp myri, Syzygium myri, which has a very recalcitrant seeding. We don't know a lot about its seed bank. We're also seeing it start to emerge on some of the rata or aka vines as well. So we're really concerned about some of these vulnerable species if myrtle rust continues to manifest or cause disease on these plants.
So arborists who are climbing around in trees, Nick, are they likely to be able to see it within the tree canopy? As you say, on some of our native vines. For those arborists that work in Auckland, they may be working in perhaps the Waitakere Ranges or some of the bigger forested parts of the region. Is it something that they should be aware of and report if they do see it?
Yes, please. We really need those reports made to iNaturalist, and also, yes, arborists will be, unlike most people, up in the trees, and there is still flowering, fruiting, new apical growth, new seasonal growth up higher up in some of those plants. So, and more than most people, the arborists will be able to see some infections that most people won't be able to. So it's really important that that is reported if you do. And iNaturalist, I know I keep banging on about it, but that is the way New Zealand is now undertaking surveillance, and it's something that both MPI and the research community and the Department of Conservation and Auckland Council all recommend we do. And it's citizen science, it's industry, it's community, it's public, all using the iNaturalist app. I can't stress that any more than what I'm doing today.
That's great. Thanks for your time today, Nick. Really appreciate your help, and it's been fascinating spending the afternoon with you at Crop and Food at Mount Albert Research. Thank you very much.
Kia ora.